I sat on my couch, scrolling through my phone when I saw it. At first, it didn't feel real. My sister Natalie, wearing my wedding dress, the one I'd bought but never wore, holding his hand. Josh, my ex-boyfriend of 6 years, the same man who'd left me just 3 months ago, the same church I'd booked and paid deposits for, the same reception hall, even the same florist. She'd taken everything and made it hers. The caption under the photo read, "Some things are meant to be." I tasted metal in my mouth. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. This wasn't just losing a boyfriend. This was my sister choosing to destroy me. Natalie looked radiant in that dress, her smile wide and triumphant. Josh looked smug, his arm around her waist possessively, and I felt like someone had carved out my chest with a rusty spoon. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too empty, too full of memories I couldn't escape. I'd spent 6 years with Josh, 6 years planning a future that included marriage and children. And Natalie took it all in 3 months. 3 months of secret messages and hidden meetings. 3 months of lies while she pretended to comfort me after the breakup. My phone exploded with notifications, text messages, social media tags, people sending me the photo with crying emojis. Some offered pity, others just wanted gossip. A few sent messages dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Are you okay? I can't believe she'd do this." But they could believe it. Everyone could. Natalie had always been competitive, always wanted what I had. But this was different. This crossed every line that existed between sisters. My mom called within an hour. "Clara, you need to be the bigger person here," she said, her voice tired. "She's your sister. Family is forever." I hung up without responding. My father didn't call at all, just sent a brief text. "This is complicated." Complicated. That was his word for choosing not to choose sides. I deleted every photo of Josh from my phone, deleted our text conversations, removed him from all my social media. But the ache stayed, buried deep in my bones. I wasn't crying because I lost Josh anymore. I was crying because my own sister had done this to me. She knew exactly what she was doing. She'd always been jealous, but I never thought she'd go this far. Friends tried to help. They really did. My best friend Keisha came over with wine and ice cream. She sat with me while I cried, rubbing my back and saying all the right things. "You're better off without him. She's toxic and you know it. You'll find someone amazing who deserves you." But none of it helped. The words felt hollow, empty, because this wasn't about Josh anymore. It was about betrayal at the deepest level, about someone who shared my childhood choosing to become my worst enemy. I taught Natalie to ride a bike, helped her with homework, defended her against bullies in middle school. We'd shared secrets and late-night conversations, and she repaid all of that by stealing the man I loved and wearing my wedding dress while doing it. The calculation of it all made me sick. She'd waited until I was at my lowest, then struck. 2 days after I saw the photo, I did something I knew was stupid. I showed up at the wedding reception, uninvited, unwanted. I stood outside the glass doors of the venue, watching them dance under fairy lights. The same fairy lights I'd chosen, the same first dance song I'd picked. Everything was mine, just with her face instead. She saw me standing there. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and she smiled. Not a guilty smile, not an apologetic smile, a triumphant smile, like she'd won some terrible game I didn't know we were playing. That smile changed something inside me. I left the reception quietly, got in my car, and drove home in complete silence. No music, no tears, just cold, clear focus. When I got home, I sat in the darkness of my living room for hours. Something had hardened inside me during that drive. Something sharp and unbreakable. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to collapse and disappear. Instead, they built something stronger. I didn't know what I'd do yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't stay broken. That night marked the end of one version of me, the trusting version, the forgiving version, the version that believed family meant something. A new version was being born in that darkness. Someone harder, someone focused, someone who understood that sometimes the best revenge wasn't rage. It was rising so far above them they could never reach you again. I went to bed at dawn. When I woke up 6 hours later, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to become someone they couldn't ignore. Someone powerful enough that their betrayal became irrelevant. I needed to transform my pain into something useful. And I knew exactly how to do it. I buried myself in work. My job at the marketing firm became my entire world. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for every difficult project. My boss noticed. "You're working like someone possessed," she said one evening. I just smiled and kept going. But work wasn't enough. I needed something bigger, something that would give me real power. That's when I decided to go to law school. The idea came to me during a sleepless night at 2 a.m. Lawyers had power, real power, the power to fight for people, to win battles, to make things right when everything felt wrong. I started studying for the LSAT immediately. Every night after work, I'd come home and study until my eyes burned. Coffee became my best friend. Sleep became optional. Natalie posted vacation photos from her honeymoon in Bali. Beautiful beaches, sunset dinners, couple photos with captions about eternal love. I posted my LSAT study schedule and practice test scores, while she celebrated her stolen victory. I was building something real. The test date approached faster than I expected. I was terrified, but I showed up and took that exam with everything I had. 3 weeks later, the scores arrived. 95th percentile. I stared at the number on my screen, barely believing it. Then I applied to every top law school in the state. The acceptance letters started arriving in March. 4 schools wanted me. I chose the one with the best family law program. When I got the acceptance letter, I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone or post about it online. I just nodded to myself and kept preparing. My parents found out through my aunt, who'd seen something on my private social media. My mom called. "Law school? That's wonderful, honey." Her voice was careful, like she was walking on glass. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," I said. "Good. That's good. Your father and I are proud." But she didn't invite me to dinner to celebrate. Didn't offer to help with moving costs. Because Natalie was pregnant now, and that was taking up all their attention and energy. I hung up and went back to packing. I didn't need their validation anymore. 3 years. That's how long law school would take. 3 years of brutal studying and sleepless nights. 3 years of giving up any kind of social life. But I'd do it, because every time I felt like quitting, I'd remember Natalie's smile at that reception, and the anger would transform into fuel, into determination, into something unstoppable. I moved into a tiny studio apartment near campus, started classes in August, and I never looked back. Law school was harder than anything I'd ever done. The reading was endless. The competition was fierce. The professors were intimidating, but I thrived in it. While other students complained about the workload, I embraced it. Every case I studied, every legal principle I memorized, every mock trial I participated in, all of it was building toward something. I finished my first year in the top 10% of my class. Second year, I made top 5%. By third year, I was competing for valedictorian. I joined the family law clinic, started taking real cases under supervision. Divorce cases mostly, women who'd been betrayed, men who'd been abandoned, children caught in the middle. Every case taught me something new, and every victory felt like practice for something bigger. My social life was non-existent. I had no time for dating or parties. My classmates thought I was obsessed. They weren't wrong, but they didn't understand what drove me. They didn't know about Natalie. About Josh. About the wedding dress and the stolen church and the triumphant smile. That was my fuel. My secret weapon. The thing that kept me going when everyone else was burning out. Graduation day arrived in May. 3 years had passed since the wedding. 3 years of relentless focus and sacrifice. I graduated second in my class. Close enough to the top to matter. My parents came to the ceremony. My mom hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Clara." My father shook my hand, his eyes saying what his mouth couldn't. Natalie didn't come. She was home with her 1-year-old daughter. But Josh showed up. I spotted him lingering near the back of the auditorium during the ceremony. He looked older, tired, gray streaks appearing in his hair. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly. After the ceremony, I saw him leaving through a side exit, shoulders hunched, moving fast like he didn't want to be seen. That's when I realized something important. They weren't happy. The fairy tale they'd built on my pain was crumbling. I could see it in the way he'd avoided eye contact, in the fact that Natalie hadn't come, in the rumors I'd heard through mutual friends about money problems and loud arguments. And that realization felt better than any revenge fantasy I'd ever imagined. I hadn't needed to destroy them. They were destroying themselves. I passed the bar exam on my first try. Scores arrived in September. I had crushed it. Within a week, I had 3 job offers from prestigious firms. I chose Morton and Associates. They specialized in family law, high-profile divorces, custody battles, complex asset divisions. The work was brutal. 70-hour weeks were normal. But I loved every minute of it. My first case was a straightforward divorce. No kids. Minimal assets. I won it easily. Then another. And another. Within 6 months, I had a reputation for being thorough, strategic, and relentless. Clients started requesting me, specifically. Partners noticed. Meanwhile, rumors about Natalie and Josh continued filtering through our social circle. He'd lost his job at the marketing firm. Money was tight. She'd stopped posting happy family photos on social media. The last photo I'd seen was from 6 months ago. Their smiles looked forced. Their eyes looked tired. I didn't smile when I heard these things. But my morning coffee did taste a little sweeter. Karma was doing its work slowly, methodically, and I didn't need to lift a finger. I just needed to keep building my career, keep winning cases, keep rising. 2 years after graduation, I made junior partner. At 32 years old, I was one of the youngest in the firm's history. The announcement came during a Monday morning meeting. My colleagues congratulated me. Some seemed genuinely happy. Others hid their jealousy poorly. I'd worked harder than any of them, sacrificed more, wanted it more. That same week, my assistant knocked on my office door. "New case file just came in," she said, placing a folder on my desk. "High conflict divorce. Complex assets. The client specifically requested you." I opened the file casually, expecting another standard case. Then I saw the name. Natalie Foster. My sister's married name. Time stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at that name for what felt like hours. My assistant was still standing there, waiting for a response. She didn't know our connection. Nobody at the firm knew about my personal history. "Everything okay?" she asked. I cleared my throat. "Yes, fine. I'll review it today." She left. I closed the door, sat down heavily in my chair, opened the file with shaking hands. The file was thick. Bank statements, property deeds, text message transcripts, a long list of complaints and grievances. I read through everything slowly, my lawyer brain processing each detail. Infidelity. Josh had been cheating. Multiple affairs. Financial abuse. He'd been hiding money. Emptying joint accounts. Emotional manipulation. Gaslighting. Isolation from family and friends. Every page revealed another layer of toxicity. This was the marriage Natalie had built on my heartbreak. This was her prize. I should have felt satisfaction, vindication, some kind of righteous victory. Instead, I felt something more complicated, something that made my chest tight. This was my sister, the same person who'd destroyed me, and she was being destroyed in return by the same man. The universe had handed me the ultimate choice. I could decline the case, maintain professional distance, walk away and let another attorney handle it, or I could step directly into the storm. Ethically, I probably should decline. Personally, I had every reason not to care about her problems, but professionally, I couldn't walk away from this opportunity. This moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day I decided to become a lawyer. I spent 3 days reviewing every document. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Josh had been planning this for years. He'd married Natalie for access to our family's business connections. My father owned a successful manufacturing company. Josh had used Natalie to get meetings, to secure contracts, to build his consulting business. She'd been a tool, a means to an end, just like I'd been before her. The difference was she'd chosen this. She'd walked into it willingly, eyes open, knowing exactly what she was taking from me. And now she was paying the price. He'd systematically isolated her from friends, convinced her that her family didn't care about her, manipulated her into signing financial documents she didn't understand, hidden money in offshore accounts, registered property under false names, all while telling her they were broke, that they were struggling, that she needed to be more careful with spending. The cruelty was calculated, methodical, exactly the kind of thing I'd spent 2 years learning to fight against in court. I made my decision. I took the case. I called Natalie's initial consultation number. A tired voice answered. "Hello. This is Clara Wilson from Morton and Associates," I said, keeping my voice professional. "I'm calling regarding your divorce case." Silence. Then Clara. "Yes, I've been assigned to your case. We need to meet to discuss strategy." More silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Finally, she said, "You're my lawyer?" "If you want me to be. You can request someone else if you prefer." I genuinely meant it. She could still walk away. No, I don't want someone else." Her voice cracked. "I just didn't expect. I understand. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2? "Yes, I'll be there." She hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time afterward, staring at nothing. This was really happening. 5 years after the wedding that broke me, I was going to represent my sister in her divorce. The irony was almost poetic. I spent the rest of the day preparing, making notes, organizing documents, building a strategy. When I left the office that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose mixed with something darker. Not quite revenge. Not quite forgiveness. Something in between. Natalie arrived at my office exactly at 2. I watched through my window as she got out of her car. She looked different. Thinner. Older. Her clothes were nice but worn. Hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes. Nothing like the radiant bride who'd smiled triumphantly at me 5 years ago. My assistant showed her in. We stood awkwardly for a moment. Then I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit." She sat. I returned to my chair and opened her file. "Before we begin, I need to make something clear," I said. "This is a professional relationship. What happened between us won't affect how I handle your case. If you want the best representation possible, I can give you that. If you'd rather work with someone else, I can make that referral. Your choice." She looked at me with red, exhausted eyes. "I want you." "Why?" "Because you're the best. Everyone says so." And because she paused. "Because I deserve whatever you decide to give me." I studied her for a moment. "You deserve competent legal representation. That's what I'll provide. Now, let's talk about your marriage." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. The affairs, the money, the manipulation, She cried several times. I handed her tissues without comment. By the end, I had everything I needed to build a strong case. Over the next few weeks, I worked on Natalie's case with the same intensity one brought to every case. Maybe more. I subpoenaed bank records, interviewed witnesses, documented every instance of financial abuse, built timelines, gathered evidence. Josh had been sloppy, arrogant. He'd assumed nobody would ever look closely enough to find his schemes. But I did. I found offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, found fake invoices and shell companies, found evidence of 3 separate affairs, not just one. Every discovery made the case stronger, made my strategy clearer. Natalie came to my office every few days, sometimes with questions, sometimes just to talk. We didn't discuss our past, didn't mention the wedding or the betrayal, just focused on the case, on getting her free from this marriage, on recovering the money he'd stolen. But the unspoken history hung between us like smoke. One afternoon she asked, "Why are you really doing this?" I looked up from my notes. "I told you, it's my job." "It's more than that." I set down my pen. "You're right. It is more than that. I'm doing this because no woman deserves what he did to you. Not even you." She flinched, but she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. The court date was set for November. 3 months away. I prepared obsessively, mock trials with colleagues, rehearsing arguments, anticipating every possible defense Josh's lawyer might use. I was ready, more than ready. The week before the hearing, I barely slept. Not from nerves, from anticipation. This was what I'd been building toward for 5 years. Not revenge, justice. There was a difference. On the morning of the hearing, I woke at 5, went for a run, came home and dressed carefully. Navy suit, white blouse, simple jewelry, professional armor. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone I barely recognized. Stronger, harder, unbreakable. Nothing like the crying girl on the couch 5 years ago. I drove to the courthouse in silence, parked, took a deep breath, then walked inside with my briefcase and my evidence and my carefully prepared arguments. Natalie was already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom. She looked terrified. I sat beside her. "You ready?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't think I can do this." "Yes, you can. I'll be right there with you." "What if he wins?" "He won't. Trust me." We walked into the courtroom together. Josh was already seated at the defendant's table with his lawyer. When he saw me walking toward the plaintiff's table, his face went white. Complete recognition. Complete shock. He'd known Natalie hired an attorney. He hadn't known it was me. "Good morning," I said calmly, setting my briefcase down. My voice carried across the quiet courtroom. Professional, confident, completely in control. Natalie sat beside me. Her hands were shaking. I handed her a tissue and told her to sit up straight. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Court was called to order. Josh's lawyer looked nervous. He kept glancing at me, then at his client. Clearly, Josh hadn't told him about our history. Smart. It would sound insane. My ex-girlfriend became a lawyer and is now representing my wife in our divorce. But here we were anyway. I stood for my opening statement, kept my voice clear and factual, outlined the case systematically. Infidelity, financial abuse, hidden assets, emotional manipulation. Every point backed by documentation. Josh's lawyer objected twice. Both times the judge overruled him. I could see Josh sweating from across the room. Good. Let him sweat. This was just the beginning. I presented my evidence, methodically. Bank statements showing money transfers to offshore accounts. Text messages proving the affairs. Testimony from Natalie about the emotional abuse. Every piece of the puzzle laid out clearly for the judge. Josh tried to maintain his composure. That smooth charm that had fooled both me and Natalie. He smiled at the judge, spoke confidently about misunderstandings and mutual mistakes. But I kept my tone surgical, precise. Each document I presented peeled away another layer of his carefully constructed lies. Property purchased under shell companies. Credit cards Natalie didn't know existed. Business invoices that were completely fake. By the time I finished my presentation, Josh's confident smile had disappeared completely. His lawyer looked defeated. The judge looked disgusted. During cross-examination, I asked Josh direct questions. Did you transfer $73,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands without your wife's knowledge? He stammered. That was for business purposes. What business? Consulting work. Can you provide documentation of this consulting work? I'd need to find it. You've had 3 months to prepare for this hearing. Why don't you have it now? He had no answer. His lawyer tried to object. The judge told Josh to answer the question. During recess, Natalie grabbed my arm in the hallway. Her eyes were wide, desperate. Why are you doing this? Really? People walked past us holding coffee cups. Lawyers discussing cases. Families waiting nervously for their hearings. I looked at my sister. I'm doing my job. But you could have destroyed me too. You had every reason to. No, I had every reason to do exactly what I'm doing, giving you the legal representation you deserve. I don't deserve your help. Not after what I did. I stepped closer, lowered my voice. You're right. You don't. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because what he did to you is wrong. Because I spent 5 years learning how to fight this kind of abuse. And because justice doesn't require forgiveness. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I'm sorry for everything. I know, but that's not why I'm winning your case. We walked back into the courtroom in silence. She sat beside me, smaller somehow. I stood taller than I'd ever been, ready for round 2. Josh's lawyer called character witnesses, friends who testified that Josh was trustworthy, that this was all a misunderstanding. I cross-examined each one methodically, destroyed their credibility with documented evidence that contradicted their testimony. When Natalie testified, her voice shook. She described the manipulation, the gaslighting, how Josh had convinced her that our family hated her, how he'd isolated her from everyone who cared about her. She cried while describing the moment she found out about the first affair, then the second, then the third. I didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. Let her words fill the courtroom. Let the judge see exactly what kind of man Josh was. Josh's lawyer tried to paint her as vindictive, as someone who'd conspired with her sister to destroy his client's reputation. I objected immediately. Counsel is speculating about conspiracy without any evidence. The judge sustained my objection. When it was Josh's turn to testify, I asked him about every affair, every hidden account, every lie he'd told. He tried to deflect, to charm his way through, but I had documentation for everything. By the end of his testimony, he looked exhausted, defeated. The courtroom took a brief recess. Natalie turned to me with red eyes. Thank you. I nodded. We're not done yet. But I knew we'd won. I could see it in the judge's expression, in the way Josh's lawyer kept whispering urgently to his client, in the way Josh himself had stopped making eye contact. We'd won. Josh tried one final move. His lawyer requested a sidebar with the judge. They spoke in hushed tones for several minutes. When they returned, the judge looked annoyed. Counsel has requested a settlement conference, she announced. We'll take a 30-minute recess. In the hallway, Josh's lawyer approached us. My client is willing to offer a settlement, avoid the publicity of a full trial. I looked at Natalie. It's your choice. She looked at Josh through the courtroom windows. He was sitting alone at his table, looking small and defeated. What would the settlement be? she asked his lawyer. He named a figure. It was substantial, but less than what she deserved. No, I said before Natalie could respond. We're not settling. Ms. Wilson, perhaps you should let your client decide. My client deserves full asset recovery, not hush money. We're going back in there, and we're going to win this case properly. Natalie looked at me with something like hope in her eyes. Okay, no settlement. Josh's lawyer walked away, shoulders slumped. When we returned to the courtroom, I presented my closing arguments, laid out every piece of evidence, every instance of abuse, every dollar stolen. The judge listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she dismissed Josh's lawyer's closing arguments as irrelevant speculation. The judge ruled from the bench, didn't even take time to deliberate. I find that the defendant systematically abused the trust of his wife, that he engaged in financial fraud, emotional manipulation, and repeated infidelity. Therefore, I rule in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. Full divorce, full asset recovery, restraining order. Josh's offshore accounts were frozen and would be returned to Natalie. He was ordered to pay her legal fees. Everything. We'd won completely. Natalie burst into tears beside me. I remained calm, professional. This was what winning looked like. Josh left the courtroom alone. His lawyer had already abandoned him at the back entrance. As we gathered our documents, Natalie turned to me. You could have destroyed me too. You had every reason. I looked at her. No, you did that yourself 5 years ago. I just stopped it from spreading further. She nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning on her face. Can we talk sometime? Really talk? Maybe. Eventually. Because some bridges take years to rebuild. Some wounds heal very slowly. We walked out of the courthouse together. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. Natalie went to her car. I went to mine. We drove in separate directions. The case was over, but the healing had just begun. News spread quickly through legal circles. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. Colleagues congratulating me. Clients requesting consultations. Media outlets asking for interviews. Attorney wins landmark divorce case against ex-boyfriend who married her sister. The headlines were everywhere. Some were sympathetic. Others were sensational. I declined most interview requests. This wasn't about fame or publicity. It was about proving something to myself. That I could rise above betrayal. That I could turn pain into power. That success built on competence lasted longer than happiness built on lies. My firm called an emergency meeting. The managing partners offered me full partnership, not junior partner. Full partnership. At 34 years old. You've brought incredible attention to our firm, the senior partner said. You embody everything we value. I accepted calmly, shook hands, smiled professionally. Inside, I felt something close to peace. 5 years ago, I'd been broken on a couch, scrolling through photos of my sister in my wedding dress. Now, I was a partner at one of the state's most prestigious family law firms. The transformation was complete. A week later, a letter arrived at my office. Handwritten. Natalie's careful script filled 3 pages. No excuses, just raw honesty and gratitude. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she wrote. I spent 5 years justifying what I did, telling myself you'd be fine, that Josh and I were meant to be, that you'd eventually understand. But you were right. I destroyed myself. You just stopped it from spreading further. She described the misery of her marriage, how Josh had changed the moment they returned from the honeymoon, how he'd isolated her systematically, made her feel worthless. I thought taking him would make me powerful, she wrote. Instead, it made me a prisoner. You were the only one strong enough to free me, and I'm so grateful, even though I don't deserve your help. I read the letter 3 times, felt nothing at first, Then something small and tentative. Not forgiveness, exactly, but not hatred either. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond immediately. Some things needed time to settle. The anger had faded into something quieter, a calm understanding that people make terrible choices, and sometimes justice is enough. 6 months after the hearing, I ran into Josh at a legal conference. He looked older, completely defeated, gray hair, tired eyes, shoulders permanently hunched. He tried to make small talk when he saw me, stammered through awkward pleasantries about the weather and the conference schedule. I smiled politely, shook his hand firmly. "Good seeing you." Then I walked away before he could finish a sentence. I felt nothing looking at him. No anger, no satisfaction, just complete indifference. He'd become irrelevant to my story, a footnote in the origin story of my legal career, the moment that pushed me to become who I was meant to be. At Thanksgiving, my family reunited for the first time in 5 years. The tension was thick when I arrived. Natalie sat quietly in the corner with her daughter. Mom kept glancing between us nervously. Dad focused intensely on carving the turkey. During dinner, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "You did something incredible," she whispered. "You showed your sister what real strength looks like." Natalie and I didn't speak much that day, but the silence between us wasn't bitter anymore. It was different, cautious, healing slowly in its own time. She helped with dishes without being asked. I passed her the soap without comment. Small gestures, baby steps toward something that might eventually resemble forgiveness. When I left that evening, she walked me to my car. "Thank you," she said simply. I said, "You're welcome." And I meant it. Not because I'd forgiven everything, but because justice had been served. And sometimes that's enough to start building again.